Well, thank you, everybody, for giving me the opportunity to speak. You may not have seen me at this conference very much this week because I've been mostly in the Biblioteca Vaticana conducting research, but the topic I want to speak on today, the paper, in fact, that you'll be able to access on the ICD website after this conference, the title of that paper is The Church-State's Problem, the Holy See in the International Theoretical or Theological Marketplace. Now, what I mean by the title of that short paper is that the controversy occasioned by the Holy See's special status and its participation in international organizations exposes weaknesses and sore spots in international relations discourse more generally. And that is to say that religious actors are frequently assumed by an international relations discourse that assumes its own rationality. Religions are assumed to be inherently destabilizing of the international system. And at best, international relations devotes most of its time and energy to problematizing religions and describing the ways in which they generate violence or anarchy. But this is too convenient, and it lacks self-awareness, certainly on the part of international relations theoreticians, because there is almost a theological nature to much international relations discourse, particularly the schools of realism and liberalism. But with my intent or my analytical bent now flagged, let me begin with the Holy See. It is notable now in the year 2014 that we stand at about 20 years since the Cairo Population Conference, which was held in 1994. That Population Conference of the United Nations is the first occasion that I can discern in modern academic literature when the status of the Holy See began to be seriously questioned. There was a flourish of mainly liberal and legal interpretivist scholarship after 1994, which made an argument that the Holy See ought not to be allowed to participate in UN conferences, given how it's very successfully obstructed the work of the Cairo conference. It did so by flagging objections during the conference and obstructing the work of the conference as a result for 3 days. The conference itself was only scheduled to last 5 days. And as a result, the conference in Cairo never got around to substantive issues of contraception and access to abortion. And that was precisely what the Holy See wanted. So that argument against the Holy See's right to participate, I should sketch that argument very briefly, but I do hasten to add that it is by turns an unconvincing argument from the liberal wing of international relations. And in short, the argument is that the Holy See is merely a religious, non-governmental organization. And as a result, its sovereignty is spurious. Most commonly, adherents to that view say that the Montevideo Convention of 1933 on the rights and duties of states sets criteria for statehood, such as population and self-sufficiency, which can hardly be met by the Holy See. And as a result, it fails a test of customary international law for being a state. I even noticed, in fact, that on the website of the ICD, the Montevideo Convention is cited as a source of debate over the Holy See's statehood. However, that seems to be based entirely on a misreading of history, and I should mention that my PhD is in diplomatic history. It's a fundamental misunderstanding because Montevideo is not even truly customary international law. Article 3 of the Montevideo Convention says that states can be said to legally exist ever before they are recognized by any other member of the international community. But as we know, that is not anywhere near international practice. For example, you could take Kosovo, which is not recognized by 4 out of the 28 members of the European Union, Spain and Greece among them. Or you could take Crimea lately. None of these enjoy a widespread, uncontested recognition. And as a result, it is debatable whether or not they can be considered for admission to international bodies. Instead, the Holy See's route to sovereignty is the more traditional one, which is recognition. And it has recognition from 180 out of 192 states in the world, the notable exception being the People's Republic of China, but that's neither here nor there. it would require another paper. In short, that is the legal reality, and the Holy See, in my opinion at least, satisfies the legal reality. But I should return, as I say, to history, and it is surely well known that the Holy See, in 1929, via the Lateran Treaty and Concordat with the Kingdom of Italy, the Holy See was given the Vatican City-State as a vassal. Now, that was 4 whole years before the Montevideo Convention was signed, and as a result, only somebody completely illiterate of law could tell you that an ex post facto law was legal. The Montevideo Convention, by being signed, did not otherwise revoke or abrogate the prior status of the Holy See. It's not possible to do that. And particularly when you look at the signatories to the Montevideo Convention, they are quite instructive. One of them was Argentina. Argentina had recognized the Holy See since 1877, which was 7 years after the Risorgimento. So Argentina, by signing the Montevideo Convention, hardly wanted it to be interpreted as cutting against the Holy See's status. So, in short, what I really suspect is afoot, given the weakness of the legal argument, is that IR scholarship, and also that of international law of a certain persuasion, is suffering from the is-ought problem. The world must be secular and based on nation states because this supposedly represents the spirit of 1648. But in this respect, I could not believe my luck when I attended here on Monday, and I heard Italian MP Marta Grande speak, and it was mentioned that she was an international relations graduate of a university in the United States, and I thought that was very telling, because she rehearsed all of the conventional wisdom about the Treaty of Westphalia and 1648, as if it was substantially true, and I hate to tell you as a historian that most of what she said was factually incorrect. You know, if you look at German historians, such as Andreas Osiander or Benno Teschke, they will tell you, having read the documents, the treaties of Westphalia, that there is nothing contained in the treaty that speaks to international sovereignty, to equality between states, to even a separation of church and state. There is absolutely nothing in the Westphalia settlement that speaks to that. It is largely the imposition of a 19th century conception of sovereignty backwards onto 1648 by scholars mainly of diplomatic practice in that age, not of 1648. In fact, Westphalia was not the great secular turn in IR at all. You could call Westphalia the Peace of Augsburg for slow learners, because all it did was restated the principle of Augsburg from 1555, that cuius reo, eius religio, whatever the prince, his religion. That was a confessional settlement, not a secular settlement. That was establishing a basic principle of tolerance, meant in the sense of, it displeases me, but it must be allowed. That was not true secularism. So, this was not a secular world order. And in fact, what you see is that religion doesn't get shut out of international relations, which is often imputed about the 1648 settlement. Rather, you actually have a closer bond forming between the state and established religion, particularly Protestantism. And this helps construct the architecture of the modern state, eventually, through developing such concepts as the monopoly on coercive power, and so on. The goal, essentially, was through religious obedience, thereby obedience to the state. That was the historical reality of Westphalia. And holding firm in southern Europe, in places like Italy, but also in Spain, it eventually, through the colonies of those southern European states, would achieve a much larger congregation than the Protestant churches south of the equator. And the numbers are plainly speak to that, because there are about 1.1 billion Catholics under the leadership of one pope, where there are thousands of Protestant sects dividing up a congregation which is about 300 million smaller, so about 700 million. And in short, the Holy See also, after Westphalia, rather than being shut out of international relations, actually grapples reflexively with the new situation, because it sees that it can now reach beyond the state. There is an increasing, what is now synonymous with the Catholic Church, becomes really prominent and can be pinpointed to this time, which is the policing of sexual morality. And you can, Isacco Turina, who is a researcher in Bologna University, published a paper last year in 2013 on the biopolitics of the Vatican, as he put it. And he suggested that the Vatican, its focus after the Council of Trent and after the Reformation on policing sexual morality was mainly driven by two reasons. First, it was playing the numbers game, because it was a simple matter of increasing the numbers of Catholics. But secondly, it was a way of regulating the most basic unit of society, which was the family. Rather than speaking to the prince anymore, the church would seek to speak to the mother, the father, and the children. But I digress. So you can see how an actor like the Holy See actually does belong in the international order, because it works through it, and it's quite subversive in how it works through it. And this destabilizes traditional theories of international relations, such as liberalism and realism. And IR scholarship then, by questioning the status of the Holy See, you can really obviously see is reacting in a bad way. It's reacting by trying to remove it as an object of study at all from international relations. And such theorists shouldn't be so confident that they aren't acting like theologians themselves, with power of anathema. What I mean is this. When former Croatian President Stjepan Mesic concentrated heavily on Monday on the capitalist underpinnings of our modern international society and globalization, he was describing these in a critical way, which was entirely apt. He was, in fact, criticizing the idea that these are taken for granted as the natural way of doing things, as being somehow the reality. Whereas the reality actually is that the present international system is a product of a political and economic consensus, and nothing stronger than that. It doesn't have the power of a natural reality. And you find that taking for granted that the way that our economy globally is presently organized is the way it should be, that is almost an article of faith for so-called secular political scientists. And in fact, I would suggest myself that international order of capitalist globalization is probably more generative of strife and warfare than religion ever was. Because rather, what we see with religions after 1648 is that they also start to be instrumentalized by the state, as I alluded to earlier. And they were especially instrumentalized by colonialist, imperialist, and capitalist plans of ambition on the part of then the nation states and empires of Britain, of the United States, latterly. Even the Catholic Church succumbs to this in colonial contexts. But my paper would explore it in more detail, and will be later available, as I say. But even still, although Catholicism was, of course, chief in shoring up the US Monroe Doctrine laterally in Latin America, the other interesting thing was how Catholicism also gave birth to liberation theology in South America. And that very much is a threat to conventional wisdom about the international order, because liberation theology itself is an implicitly Marxist critique of global politics and society. And as a result, it set itself up as a religious competitor, as I say, in a theological marketplace, with the other preferential view of the world order. It was in opposition to this rational, market-based approach. So, in conclusion, and it is the conclusion, I will say that when we speak of world peace and the idyll of world peace, that won't be achieved by a summary elimination of religion from the scene. But rather, it will be, if world peace is achieved, it will be the result of what Marxists such as myself believe to be the elimination of structural or systemic violence of the capitalist system. So thank you.